Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 22, the second part of our discussion on the mental box and what this has to do with hope. I'm going to try to go to a daily format where I'm going to make a new video every day. I'll try that for a couple weeks, see if I can maintain that schedule, and we'll just go from there. The first two sides of the box that I went over, the first was prior knowledge, information that you heard and accepted as true and are now using it as part of your way of making choices and decisions in the world, right? So this is the pool of information that you are using to make future and current decisions. Okay, so that's the first wall. The second wall would be government rules and regulations, right? People don't venture beyond that wall because it's illegal. And then we also discussed how to get around that wall if you want to. And plus, most of these regulations and laws that we encounter in life are not necessarily there for our safety and protection. And I think I'm going to get into free market dynamics after starting in the next episode. All right, so the third wall that we may encounter in the box, and I'll keep in mind that this is very personal, that I've developed these or kind of came up with these walls because these were my own personal walls. Other people can hear about these walls and relate to them, but how you adjust and apply it to your personal life, for your individual life, well, that's going to be subjectively up to you. Okay, so this becomes kind of a reference. We can see it in the world around us, but how you are going to perceive it, conceptualize it, and then try to move beyond those walls is completely up to you, right? And as I said in the last episode, you can use it in any way that you want, but if you can give props to me while you're doing it, that would be awesome. Hey, the subjective professor said this. All right, so the third wall, and in case you hear thunder, I'm in the middle of a thunderstorm right now, but I have to record it now because I promised my kid I'd play Settlers of Catan with him. Okay, so here it is. The third wall is our religion, our religious belief, or our morality, our sense of morality, because that's really what religion is what we believe is true, what we believe is right. And out of our religious belief, that is our morality, we have personal moral codes. This is, and we talked about religion in episode 7, so you can go back and check that out if you want. But this wall is very, very tricky. I myself, personally, I have very, very strong religious beliefs. For the most part, they are sacrosanct, right? Quite literally. Like I won't touch them. I will always maintain them. And it's for that reason that everyone else should be allowed to believe whatever it is that they want, except they have to take responsibility for those beliefs. In other words, all belief has risk of being wrong, right? Risk of being not the best thing to believe in. But as long as you're willing to take the risk, take responsibility for those beliefs and all the consequences that result as a result of having those beliefs, have at it. But this is tricky today because a lot of people have sort of distorted this understanding of religion. And so some people, because they believe that their beliefs are not religious, try to force it down everyone's throats, right? And they change the perception of their personal moral beliefs, religious beliefs, by calling them facts, right? And this shouldn't be surprising to anyone who knows anything about the history of religion, but anyone who feels very, very strongly about their religious belief, traditionally understood, will say that they are facts that everyone else must comply with, right? And you see this in theocracies as well, that is, governments based on religion, particularly in the Middle East. Everyone else either has to comply or you're living life at a disadvantage. Well, we see the same situation today. It's most easily seen through virtue signaling, right? What some people will call virtue signaling today, right? So they believe that whatever it is that they believe is absolutely true. You can't argue against it. And if you do argue against it, if you don't agree, you're a hater, you're a racist, you're a fascist, you're a Nazi, etc. And so when you encounter someone who is a fanatical believer of a certain environmental knowledge production, a certain subjective opinion on the war in the Ukraine, whatever, it can be anything. But you can tell that it is a fanatical religious belief when you start talking about it. The response or the reaction becomes very much over the top, overreaction, very indicative of the kinds of things you saw in religious circles back in the day. We've said that atheists are just the same. They have very, very strong moral codes. I've seen on YouTube some atheist channels, and they proselytize, right? They try to get people to convert to atheism. And they're very, very passionate about it, right? So atheism is a religion as well, a belief in no God. Football, we know North American football is a very big deal here in the United States. I would say that in some cities, certain times of the year, that is the number one religion. Everyone structures and prioritizes all of the decisions in their life around the schedule of football, right? So continued belief in something, right? And we're still on that religion wall, is perfectly fine, right? So if I believe that the Cincinnati Bengals have a shot at winning the Super Bowl, right? It's an American football team. They're not that good, right? They've never won the Super Bowl, but they still have fans. And so if you want to continue to believe that the Bengals will win this year, well, that's perfectly fine. However, if you turn it into the law that everyone must believe and therefore act accordingly, that the Bengals will win the Super Bowl, and so you got to wear this Super Bowl gear, you got to buy the clothes, you got to produce the clothes, you got to, do all of this stuff. Well, now it becomes kind of oppressive. So in other words, a Bengals fan can do whatever they want because they voluntarily want. No one is forcing them to do that. But to force and coerce other people to do it, see, that's when you have problems. This is the same for everything. If you want to believe in a deity, have at it. But then all of the consequences, then those are yours. You can't force other people to have the same belief if you can't persuade them to do so, if you can't make a convincing argument or present a case in such a way that they will agree with you. The same is true with recycling, climate change, it doesn't really matter. Everything. If you can't present an argument where someone is going to say, hey, you're right, I never thought about that. Short of that, you can't force anyone to comply. All right. So there is the tricky problem. Now, a lot of people will find a way out of this by simply starting a new religion. Even within, like, say, Christianity, most religions, as far as the religions that I've seen, they come up with a different variety, a different sect, a subgroup within that religion. So we call them sects, SECTS, right? Subgroups. And that's kind of an innovation within religious denominations. The thing about religion is that the moral codes tend to ignore costs, right? Even if it's very expensive to believe in that, right? You have to sacrifice a lot. You have to, ban certain behaviors personally. So the cost is very, very high. Moral codes tend to ignore the costs. And so we can see that and this is why it's a very bad idea to force it on everyone in society. So for example, the fanatical green movement, you can believe whatever you want, but to force it on everybody ignores all of the different costs that are involved for each individual. And this is what makes it oppressive, and ultimately it will fail because it is coercive and it is not the best solution every single time in every single situation. So do it if, continue to believe it if it makes sense to you, but, you have to leave everyone else alone. So overcoming this wall is kind of tricky. However, there is, in the same way you can find loopholes in government laws and regulations, you can find loopholes, so-called, in religious beliefs. In other words, sometimes the way you understand certain concepts are not the best. And we saw this with the word greed in episode 16. So if you have a better understanding of greed, then it changes a lot of the interpretation that you will do within your religion, within your religious moral sense, right? Having a better definition changes lots of things. And so therefore, some things that you thought were no longer legal, now they become legal. So for example, I'll give you a more easy example. The drug war here in the United States is kind of insane. And I grew up believing that doing drugs is really, really bad. Only certain drugs, right? Other drugs, perfectly fine. So when it came to marijuana, it was always bad, and people who smoked marijuana were bad people, et cetera, et cetera. And then I listened to the medical marijuana debate, and I saw, thank goodness there was YouTube, I saw people taking medical marijuana, not to get high, but to take care of symptoms of Parkinson's disease, how it's beneficial for people going through cancer treatments. And then I realized, it's a drug, sure, but just like all other drugs, there is use and abuse. To ban it completely doesn't make any sense. It serves the interests. And if you go back to our deconstruction episodes, it serves the interests and it benefits a small minority, but at the same time, a lot of other people, larger population, lose as a result of that information, right? So having better understanding of the actual terminology, of the actual phenomena that drives our religious beliefs, that could result in kinds of change in beliefs. Okay, I'll just leave it there because it is very, very touchy. Next wall, the last wall, is language. I'll spend only a small part of bit of time on this because for a lot of people it just makes no sense. But we mentioned language before in episode 14 when it came to institutional racism. However, to go into it a little bit deeper, in the United States particularly, there is a very strong nativistic sort of attitude, climate, atmosphere. In other words, if you came from another country, you have to become American, whatever that means. Okay, it's very arbitrary. And so part of the nativistic demand is for you to speak only one language, and that would be American, right? That would be the English language in the way that most Americans speak it, which is basically badly. But anyway, but what is language? Language, a lot of people say, well, it doesn't really matter because it's just communication. I'm not a linguist, but I know enough about language to know that it's more than communication. Language, because of the grammar and the vocabulary, they produce and reproduce, and preserve the values and the beliefs of the people who speak that language. In other words, it's more than just simply, I have this idea, I want to vocalize it so that you can hear it and then consider it. It's much more than that. It preserves the culture. It preserves the beliefs of the people who speak it. I'll give you a really fast example. In the United States is largely egalitarian. If I wanted to say to the president of the United States, have dinner, I could just say, hey, dinner's ready, sit at the table. I could go to my family and say, hey, dinner's ready, come sit at the table. I can go to my students at school where I used to teach, hey, dinner's ready, why don't you come on and sit at the table, right? It doesn't matter who I'm talking to, I can always use the same words. However, in the language that my parents speak, depending on who you are and the person that you're speaking to, you have to use a completely different set of terminology. And that's because that society is hierarchical, and the language bears this out, right? So when you speak, depending on who you're speaking to, even the signage has its own particular grammatical expressions, right? Because you don't know who's going to read the sign, right? So it's supposed to indicate your status relative to the person you're speaking to. I know a lot of people in America and North America, they have a hard time with that, but there it is. And so within the language itself is not just communication, but preservation of values. And this is a big deal when it comes to not only the example that I brought up in episode 14, how to get around this whole institutionally racist language, but also to overcome barriers that people have with their parents, with people from other countries, right? You have to take that cultural component into consideration. Okay, I'm going to try to finish up the episode quickly, even though I have a monstrous amount of stuff, because this is a very large topic. So that's the box, the 4 sides of the box, and you can come up with more sides, as I've already said. But hope is never in the box, right? The box represents the limitation of your knowledge and information. And I said earlier that that a problem is just simply the limit of your knowledge. And so if you want to really resolve the problem, you got to get past, you got to have more knowledge. And so the wall represents the end of your knowledge. And so what do you got to do to solve your problem? You gotta get more knowledge somehow. In other words, you're not going to be able to solve the problem with the information that you have already, because that's why it's a problem, right? So we want voluntary problem solving, not coercive. Everyone has to deal with it this way, right? That never solves the problem. So we're going to move beyond the box. Once you get the hang of it, of trying to overcome your knowledge deficiency, sort of like a vitamin deficiency, right? Once you get the hang of doing it, in the future, you may reach the limit of your knowledge, but you move past it so easily, so quickly, that you really don't notice it any longer. Every once in a while, I encounter a student who's already doing it. They get all excited. I get excited. And they said because now they can put words to the phenomena that they are performing and why other people can't do it. So this explains why we can't do it, right? Because we prefer to stay within our comfort zone. We don't like to explore, the unknown, because there are so many risks. As I said, many innovative ideas, there are many innovative ideas, but a lot of them do not add value. In fact, they're very, very expensive. And so I don't know if you followed the news, there was a submarine that would go try to see the Titanic, and it was called the Titan, and it imploded. That could be considered a very innovative concept. However, it was flawed. It was known to be flawed too. And so what we have to realize is that everyone who participated in that took a big risk. But since they all had to sign waivers, they knew the risks, even if they didn't completely understand them. They knew what the risks were, and they made the choice anyway. There it is. Now, the free market, freedom, punishes inefficiency and waste. It punishes bad ideas. It's very expensive, particularly in this situation. It's expensive because they lost their lives. So for that person, it costs them everything, right? But as long as they have to pay for it, I don't have to worry about it. Oh, so a submarine imploded, feel bad for the families, but there's no skin off my nose. So in other words, we don't need to solve problems through regulations. It's competition, right? And the cost of our choices, which determine the best way to improve and cut waste, how to be more efficient with all of our resources, how to put them to the best uses. Regulations do the opposite. It forces people to continue to use the same bad idea. Just want to remind everyone that getting out of the box can be extremely scary, frightening, because, right, it's so unfamiliar. I have to leave my comfort zone. We, as an individual, like I might say, yeah, I can't do that. It's too dangerous, or morally, I just can't do it. fine. But you got to let other people out of the box, right? You can't say, well, I'm too afraid to do it, so you're not allowed to do it either. No, you can't do that. And this is why freedom is so important. And this is why understanding subjectivity is very important. What we might perceive because of our prior knowledge is immoral or wrong or doomed to fail. You got to let other people take that risk, right? Roll the dice, see what happens. And then we, from our safe space, we get to watch the results. And if it turns out well, then hey, we can do it too. But you got to let other people have the freedom. You got to let other people out of their box. Society as a whole benefits from their risk taking, okay? And risk taking is not just wingsuit flying, okay? That always ultimately results in death, right? But I'm talking about the cell phone, the internet, doing internet business, doing podcasting, something like this. This is where hope comes from, right? Hope is never in the box. Hope is never found in the things that we already have and that we already know, right? Remember, the box is the problem. And so getting out of the box, right? That hope of getting out of the box, to find those solutions, to find something better. See, that's what drives life. So we can always look ahead. We can always look forward and then support politicians, perhaps, or business people who are responsible, taking all of this information in, making the proper considerations to produce something which will add value for everybody. And this is what we need. So I hope that this is helpful to you, help you to understand the whole dynamic of what limits and restricts our ability to think. And I'll see you in the next episode. And if everything goes to plan, we'll be talking about freedom in the free market. See you there.